Daniel Carter said his wife, Melissa, vanished during her evening walk, but when her phone lit up in his jacket pocket during a police interview, everything he claimed began to crumble. Daniel and Melissa Carter were the kind of couple that blended seamlessly into their quiet suburban neighborhood in Oak Hill. Their house sat at the corner of a cul-de-sac lined with trimmed hedges and well-kept lawns. They waved to neighbors, attended block parties, and never caused any trouble. Daniel, an accountant at a small firm downtown, had a reputation for being dependable and mild-mannered. Melissa, who taught weekend art classes at a local community center, was known for her gentle demeanor and love of gardening. To the outside world, they were stable, calm, and utterly unremarkable, the sort of couple that no one ever suspected of hiding anything. That on a warm Saturday evening in July, everything changed. Daniel called 911 just after 8 p.m., his voice shaking as he reported that his wife had not returned from her usual evening walk. According to him, she left the house around 6:30 p.m., wearing athletic clothes and her usual walking shoes. He said she often left her phone behind when she went out, something he never understood but had come to accept. When she still hadn't come home after an hour, he claimed he began to worry. After checking the nearby park and her usual walking routes with no luck, he made the call. The news spread quickly. Within hours, search parties were being organized. Neighbors volunteered to comb the nearby woods and streets. Flyers with Melissa's face began appearing on lampposts and bulletin boards. Local news stations aired Daniel's tearful pleas for help, painting the story as a tragic disappearance of a loving wife and community member. He spoke to reporters with a trembling voice, describing Melissa's habits, her routines, and how unlike her it was to vanish without a word. He even set up a reward fund, using his own savings to encourage tips. To those watching, Daniel's distress seemed genuine. He was cooperative with police, offering access to the home, phone records, and even security camera footage from their doorbell cam, though it oddly showed nothing beyond Melissa stepping out of frame. Detectives took his statement, walked through the house, and spoke with neighbors. Everyone said the same thing. Daniel and Melissa never fought in public, always seemed happy, and were quiet people who minded their own business. But despite the large-scale search, there were no leads. Melissa's phone was reportedly left at home, but it didn't help much. Daniel said it had been on the kitchen counter. The police confirmed it had not been used since that afternoon. Her bank cards hadn't been used, and there was no activity on her social media accounts. It was as if she had simply vanished into thin air during a short walk through a safe neighborhood in broad daylight. The longer Melissa remained missing, the more sympathetic Daniel appeared. He continued to give interviews, handing out missing person flyers in front of grocery stores and gas stations. He looked exhausted, with dark circles under his eyes and a blank, distant stare that seemed too real to be fake. He even joined the search parties himself, walking through ditches and trails alongside volunteers, carrying a flashlight and Melissa's scarf, which he claimed carried her scent in case the search dogs needed it. Yet something subtle lingered beneath the surface. A few neighbors began to quietly question why Melissa, a woman so cautious and routine-driven, would leave for a walk without her phone or telling anyone exactly where she was going. Others noticed how Daniel, while outwardly devastated, never seemed to cry unless cameras were present. The house remained spotless, the lawn still trimmed, and the dogs still walked on schedule. Everything about the Carter home looked perfectly in order, almost too perfectly, and one voiced these doubts openly. Not yet. In a town like Oak Hill, suspicion came slowly and quietly, whispered in kitchens and behind fences. But the seeds had been planted. Something didn't feel right. And the more investigators looked into Daniel's version of events, the more they began to wonder if Melissa Carter had really disappeared at all, or if someone had carefully made her vanish. Police launched an official investigation the morning after Melissa was reported missing. They began by mapping out her regular walking routes based on Daniel's account. Oak Hill wasn't a large town, and most of the neighborhoods were tightly packed with clear visibility between houses and streets. Melissa typically walked for about 45 minutes in the early evening, usually sticking to well-lit areas near the community park, the library, and the elementary school. Officers canvassed those places, knocking on doors, asking for security footage, and checking any public cameras that might have caught her movement. Strangely, there wasn't a single sighting of her after she supposedly left the house. The scent trail picked up by the search dogs led to a narrow alley behind a local pharmacy, not far from her usual route. But the trail ended abruptly there. There was no further sign of her, no hair, clothing, or phone. Police reviewed surveillance footage from nearby businesses, but none showed Melissa walking by. Not at the pharmacy, not near the school, not at the crosswalks. It was as if she never reached any of those places. That's when the timeline began to fall under more scrutiny. Daniel had said he was fixing a cabinet in the kitchen when Melissa left. He claimed he heard the door close, but didn't see her leave. When asked to recount his activities during the time she vanished, he provided a vague timeline, saying he stayed home until he noticed the sun starting to go down. Detectives asked to see his phone to check call logs and GPS. He handed it over, willingly, which initially seemed like a sign of cooperation. But when the tech team reviewed the device, they noticed an inconsistency. While Daniel said he hadn't left the house until after he realized Melissa was gone, the GPS data showed a 45-minute trip in the early evening. He had driven northeast, out of Oak Hill, and returned just before making the 911 call. When questioned about this, Daniel admitted he had driven out to a hardware store to pick up cabinet screws, but had forgotten to mention it. He claimed he was embarrassed and thought it made him look careless. He said he felt guilty not being home when Melissa disappeared and didn't want to complicate things. This minor lie, however, raised flags for investigators. Forgetting a trip during the critical time frame of a disappearance didn't seem like a simple oversight. Detectives began looking deeper. They pulled footage from the hardware store Daniel claimed to visit, but found no evidence he had been there. No receipt, no camera footage, nothing placing him at the location. While outwardly the investigation remained broad, with flyers and search teams still active, behind the scenes the focus began shifting. Daniel was no longer just the worried husband. Detectives requested phone records, credit card transactions, and toll booth camera data from the route he allegedly took. A pattern started forming. There were small gaps, little inconsistencies in his timeline, unclear answers about the couple's recent interactions, and an increasing sense that Daniel was leaving something out. Meanwhile, Melissa's friends began coming forward with private details. One friend said Melissa had recently seemed withdrawn and nervous, though she never explained why. Another revealed that Melissa had been thinking of making some big life changes, possibly moving or finding a new job. Still, none of these statements offered direct evidence of foul play. The media continued reporting on Melissa's disappearance as a tragic mystery. Candlelight vigils were held in front of the community center, and a growing number of volunteers combed the town's wooded edges. Yet, as the case dragged into its second week, the emotional weight of the story began to shift. What had started as a heartbreaking tale of a missing woman now carried a faint but unmistakable edge of suspicion. Quietly and methodically, the investigation was narrowing in on Daniel. As the second week wore on, the surface-level support for Daniel began to crack. Detectives who had initially accepted his version of events started to question not just his statements, but his demeanor. He was cooperative, yes, but in a way that felt rehearsed. He never asked for updates on the investigation. He never called to push for new leads. Instead, he showed up for press appearances, always in a neatly pressed shirt, with carefully worded statements and a measured tone that seemed more focused on optics than urgency. It wasn't what he said, it was what he didn't say that unsettled the officers the most. The investigation shifted inward. Detectives turned their attention to Daniel and Melissa's marriage. On the surface, they appeared to be a loving couple. But when investigators spoke with Melissa's friends and family, a more complicated picture emerged. Melissa had grown increasingly distant in the months before she disappeared. Friends said she had stopped attending gatherings, had become cautious about her phone conversations, and once whispered that she didn't feel safe anymore. Though she never gave specific reasons, her eyes, they said, were tired. A deeper search revealed Melissa had met with a divorce attorney just 2 weeks before she vanished. She hadn't filed yet, but she had been planning. She had also started moving small amounts of money into a private account, amounts small enough not to draw attention, but regular enough to raise questions once discovered. It became clear that Melissa had been preparing for something. Maybe an exit, maybe protection. Whatever it was, she had not told Daniel. At least not yet. A digital search of Daniel's devices uncovered something else. Melissa's email login had been accessed multiple times from his IP address. He denied knowing her password, but records showed it had been entered correctly and used to access private messages. It painted a darker picture, that Daniel may have been monitoring her activity, perhaps out of suspicion, perhaps out of fear of losing control. The clean and tidy home that had once impressed investigators now felt unnerving. There were no signs of a struggle, no broken furniture, no stains or missing items. But something about the pristine environment felt unnatural. Crime scene analysts were brought in to re-examine the home using advanced detection methods. They found faint traces of bleach in the garage, though Daniel explained this away by saying he had cleaned up after the dog had an accident. The story was plausible, but the amount of cleaner used raised eyebrows. Investigators also looked into Daniel's finances. His accounts revealed increasing debt, credit cards nearly maxed out, a second mortgage that hadn't been mentioned during early questioning, and a withdrawal of nearly $10,000 just days before Melissa vanished. The money wasn't traceable, and Daniel refused to say what it was used for. He claimed it was for home repairs, yet no contractor confirmed being hired. No receipts were provided. Melissa's disappearance, once treated as a community tragedy, now felt like a puzzle with missing pieces deliberately hidden. Investigators suspected that Daniel wasn't just lying. He was orchestrating a cover-up, but they lacked the critical evidence to make an arrest. They needed something tangible, something undeniable. Late one evening, a detective rewatched Daniel's initial police interview. Something subtle caught her attention. When describing what Melissa wore the night she disappeared, Daniel paused, blinked, and changed his description mid-sentence, from a blue hoodie to a gray one. It seemed small, but to someone who had just lost their spouse, that kind of detail should have been etched in his memory. The inconsistency stood out. Investigators knew they were close. They just didn't realize how close they truly were until the moment Melissa's phone, a device everyone believed had been left behind, suddenly revealed itself in the most unexpected place. The turning point came on a quiet Sunday morning, 2.5 weeks after Melissa's disappearance. Daniel had been asked to come in for another round of questioning, presented as a routine follow-up. He arrived wearing a dark jacket, looking tired but composed. He sat calmly across from 2 detectives in the small, windowless interview room. They asked him to go over the timeline once more, focusing on minor details. What time exactly did he hear the door close? Did the dog react? What color was the sky when he started to worry? Daniel answered patiently, carefully, as if he'd rehearsed it all before the interview stretched on. The air grew thick with tension. Then, something unexpected happened. A faint vibration buzzed from Daniel's jacket pocket, followed by a dim light glowing through the fabric. Both detectives noticed. One of them leaned forward, casually asking if he had brought another phone with him. Daniel hesitated, then shook his head slowly. The glow flickered again. This time, one of the officers asked him to empty his pockets. Reluctantly, Daniel reached into the inner pocket of his jacket and pulled out a phone. It was a slim, silver model with a small crack near the bottom corner. The lock screen lit up, showing missed notifications, texts, updates, and a missed call. The name on the screen stopped everyone cold. It was Melissa's phone, the very device Daniel had claimed she left at home the day she vanished. The same phone he said was sitting on the kitchen counter when police arrived. The detective stared at the device in silence. Daniel mumbled that he had found it recently, in the garage, and had forgotten to turn it in. But that explanation unraveled instantly when the phone was examined. The activity log showed recent usage, texts read, apps opened, messages deleted. Most damning of all, it had been syncing to a Wi-Fi network registered to Daniel's laptop. Just hours earlier, that moment, Daniel was no longer a witness or a concerned husband. He was a suspect caught in a lie too big to explain away. He was immediately detained while police obtained a new search warrant to go through the house, cars, and digital devices again, this time with a clear focus on collecting evidence tied to Melissa's phone and its recent activity. In the following hours, forensic experts confirmed the device was indeed Melissa's, based on serial numbers, cloud backups, and personal files. Investigators recovered deleted messages that suggested Daniel had tried to erase parts of her communication history. There were searches made from the phone late at night. Queries like, "Can deleted texts be recovered?" and "How to wipe phone permanently without being detected?" These searches weren't from Melissa. They were from Daniel's network and occurred after she had already been reported missing. Further analysis revealed the phone had been turned off for several days before being powered back on just a few hours before the interview. Investigators believed Daniel had kept it hidden, possibly trying to access or destroy information on it, only to slip up and carry it into the police station. The discovery of the phone was more than just a piece of technology. It was proof that Daniel had been lying from the beginning. It challenged the entire foundation of his story and introduced a new urgency to the investigation. No longer limited by speculation, police now had physical evidence that connected him directly to Melissa's disappearance after the time he claimed she was last seen. It was the mistake that unraveled everything, and what had once been a careful cover-up began to fall apart, one secret at a time. With Melissa's phone recovered from Daniel's pocket, the case moved swiftly. Detectives wasted no time in re-examining every inch of the Carter property, this time with forensic precision and a clearer picture of what they were looking for. The house that once appeared meticulously clean now seemed suspiciously so. Crime scene specialists brought in luminol and UV lights, scouring the garage, bathroom, and basement for signs of tampering. In the trunk of Daniel's sedan, beneath the spare tire compartment, they discovered a faint stain. It was small, almost invisible, but testing revealed it to be blood. A sample confirmed what they feared. It was Melissa's. The forensic team dug deeper into Daniel's digital footprint. Along with the deleted messages and searches found on Melissa's phone, they uncovered a troubling internet history on his own devices. In the days leading up to Melissa's disappearance, he had searched for terms like how to make someone disappear without a trace, can police track deleted GPS data, and fast-acting poisons that leave no trace. Although disturbing, the searches were not enough to prove murder. Investigators needed more, something physical, undeniable, and final. They turned back to the GPS data from Daniel's phone on the night Melissa vanished. That 45-minute trip he had once claimed was for hardware supplies was traced to a desolate construction site on the outskirts of town. It had been abandoned for over a year and surrounded by woods and gravel roads rarely used. The site had been overlooked during the early days of the search, but now it became the focal point of the investigation. A search team was dispatched with cadaver dogs, forensic tools, and aerial drones. It didn't take long for the dogs to signal at a shallow mound of freshly disturbed earth near the edge of the lot. Underneath the soil, wrapped in a tarp, was the body of Melissa Carter. Her clothes matched Daniel's initial description. The autopsy revealed blunt force trauma to the back of her head. There were no defensive wounds, suggesting she had been taken by surprise. No drugs or alcohol were found in her system. She had died quickly and without a chance to fight back. News of the discovery broke quickly. Reporters gathered outside the Carter home, now cordoned off by police tape. Neighbors watched from behind curtains, stunned that the man they had once believed to be a grieving husband had been hiding his wife's phone and had driven to the burial site the same night. He called 911. The entire town of Oak Hill was shaken. Daniel was arrested and charged with murder, obstruction of justice, and evidence tampering. During the trial, prosecutors laid out a chilling narrative. Daniel, drowning in debt and learning that Melissa was preparing to leave him, saw her departure as a personal and financial threat. He didn't want a divorce. He didn't want his secrets exposed. So, on that quiet evening, he attacked her. In the garage, loaded her into the trunk, and drove her to the construction site to bury her. He returned home, cleaned up, and waited until just the right moment to call the police, setting in motion a lie that he believed could hold. But the lie unraveled with one mistake. Carrying the very phone he claimed she left behind. It was a careless act that exposed a carefully constructed deception. The jury took less than a day to deliver a guilty verdict. Daniel Carter was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole.